They say the most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in beauty. Our home in Boulder, Colorado was picture perfect. 2 stories with a wraparound porch, white trim, and a lavender bush that always seemed to bloom at the right time. On the outside, we were the family everyone else wanted to be. My mother, Evelyn Morgan, was the neighborhood psychologist who gave parenting workshops. My father, Daniel, was the quiet intellectual with a PhD in data science and a Tesla parked in the driveway. And then there were the 2 daughters, Olivia, the quiet, well-behaved firstborn, and Ava, the radiant little prodigy everyone adored. But what they didn't see behind those French windows and curated smiles was the twisted truth. That in my family, love was a competition, and I was losing badly. I was 7 years old the first time I realized I wasn't wanted the way I'd hoped to be. I had just won second place in a regional art contest. My painting, Evening Fields, had been chosen to be displayed in a local gallery. It was the first time I saw adults I didn't know stop and stare at something I had created. I rushed home, canvas in hand, my heart pounding with excitement. I found my mother in the kitchen mixing kale into a blender. "Mom, look!" I held up the painting breathless. She glanced for no more than 2 seconds. "That's lovely, sweetie. But guess what? Ava read an entire chapter book today. At 5. My painting fell to my side. The praise I waited for never came. That was just one of many moments where the message became clearer. I wasn't exceptional, so I didn't matter. But if you think this is just a story about a forgotten child, let me stop you here. This isn't about being overlooked. This is about what happens when someone who was cast in the shadows for years decides to take center stage and refuses to leave. This is about betrayal in its most polished form, and how I took back what was stolen, publicly, unapologetically, and with a mic in my hand. My mother once told her friends she had read over 40 books on cognitive development before I was born. She said it like a badge of honor, as if the more she learned about raising children, the more she deserved one that would be brilliant. I later realized what she really wanted wasn't a daughter. She wanted a project that would make her look successful. My early years were a flurry of flashcards, educational toys, classical music on timers, and parental observations jotted down in journals. I wasn't just raised, I was monitored, measured, and molded. At age 3, when I couldn't identify all the planets in the solar system, my mother's tone shifted. "She's just slower than we expected," she told my father, not even bothering to lower her voice as I sat nearby, coloring inside the lines. By the time Ava was born, everything shifted. My mother transformed into a high-functioning, hyper-controlling machine of maternal ambition. Ava had a Swedish sleep coach, Italian storybooks, and a sensory gym in the basement. I, meanwhile, was handed multiplication workbooks and told to push through my struggles. The worst part wasn't the neglect. It was the constant reminder of how much more someone else mattered in the exact same house. I once overheard my father whisper to a colleague during a dinner party, "Olivia's more of a steady type. Ava's the one with the spark." Steady, like a train on tracks, useful only because it moves, expected never to derail or make a scene. I spent my childhood memorizing what not to do. Don't cry. Don't ask for more. Don't make things about you. Let Ava shine. Let mom rest. Let dad think. Let go of being seen. By 10, I had accepted it. That year, without warning, my bedroom was reassigned to Ava. It wasn't discussed. No sit-down talk. I simply came home from school one afternoon and found my books boxed, my posters rolled up, and my bed moved to the laundry room corner. "Olivia, Ava needs the quiet space for her tutoring sessions," my mom said as if it were self-explanatory. "It was my room," I said, trying not to let my voice shake. "You're older, you should understand." I slept beside the hum of the washing machine for the next 6 years. But I wasn't completely alone. My grandparents, Thomas and Mary Morgan, lived just outside Boulder in a modest red brick home filled with warmth and the smell of fresh banana bread. They were the only people who saw me as more than a background character in Ava's story. "Don't ever let someone else decide your worth," Grandma would say as we sat on the porch. "You decide that." I started keeping a notebook hidden under my pillow. In it, I wrote every insult, every overlooked moment, every milestone that no one at home ever clapped for. Not because I needed to remember, but because I needed proof that I was trying, that I was still here. By the time high school rolled around, Ava was on every honors list imaginable. She attended a private academy with tuition that matched some colleges. Meanwhile, I went to Boulder High, walked to class, worked part-time at a local cafe, and studied under dim lights while Ava had private tutors and the best learning tools money could buy. But I didn't let it break me. I channeled it. I taught myself how to build spreadsheets. I entered regional business competitions. I volunteered at local investment workshops for teens, learning terms like ROI and liquidity ratios before most kids my age understood what a credit score was. In my senior year, I applied to the University of Washington's business program, and I got in with a partial scholarship. The day I got the acceptance letter, I remember sitting at the dinner table waiting for the right moment to share. Ava got an early invite to a Harvard feeder program, my dad announced. "That's amazing," Mom beamed. I cleared my throat. "I got accepted to the University of Washington. Business program. I'll need to apply for more aid, but..." "We can't help with that," Mom said abruptly, setting down her fork. "We've allocated the education fund for Ava's opportunity." My voice caught in my throat. I thought that money was for both of us. "She's the one with real potential," Dad added, not even blinking. The silence that followed was unbearable. The only sound was the clinking of silverware, until Grandma set her spoon down with a decisive clang. "Enough," she said. "We'll pay for Olivia's tuition. Every cent." And just like that, the glass box I had lived in for years cracked. I never asked for revenge. I asked to be treated fairly. But when even that was too much, I stopped asking. And I started building my escape. If this story has already struck a chord with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home or like your voice was drowned out by someone else's spotlight, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Your support gives us the drive to create more stories that matter, stories that shine light on truths people often try to hide. Now, before we continue to the next part of Olivia's story, here's a quick question to reflect on. If you were Olivia at that dinner table, what would you have done? A. Speak up and demand a fair explanation, risking confrontation. B. Stay silent and seek independence in your own way. Comment your answer below. Just type A or B, and let's see how many of you have faced similar crossroads in your life. Now let's continue. Because what Olivia did next wasn't just brave. It was the start of everything. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that doesn't explode but instead settles, quietly, pervasively, like fog in the lungs. That was my adolescence. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't demand fairness. I simply faded. After the night my parents withdrew all financial support from my college dreams to invest it in Ava's Ivy League pipeline, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. It was recognition. The kind you don't want to accept because it severs the very roots you thought were holding you in place. But some truths, once seen, cannot be unseen. I began to move through the world differently. Less as a daughter, more as a tenant in a house that had long since stopped feeling like home. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, an erosion, like waves hollowing out a cliffside until one day the ground beneath you gives way and you're left holding air. School became my sanctuary. I'd arrive early and stay late, immersing myself in books, projects, anything that kept me from going home before I absolutely had to. I joined the economics club, the school paper, even volunteered at a local nonprofit that helped underprivileged teens understand financial literacy. Ironically, while I was helping others prepare for a future they weren't sure they could afford, I was barely holding on to my own. At home, the silence between me and my parents stretched like a canyon. My father stopped asking about my classes. My mother only spoke to remind me to keep my side of the laundry room tidy. Ava, meanwhile, glided through the house like royalty. Her world was filled with phone calls from admissions advisors, essay coaches, and SAT tutors. I lived in the shadows of her glow, trying not to be blinded by it. The room I'd been forced into years earlier had no windows, no view, and barely enough space for a desk and a twin bed. At night, I'd lie awake and listen to the humming of the washing machine, like a mechanical lullaby reminding me I wasn't where I belonged. That space wasn't a room, it was a message, one I finally began to understand. When my classmates planned their senior trips, I worked double shifts at the campus cafe to save up for textbooks. While they shopped for prom dresses, I scoured the public library for financial aid information and college survival guides. I wasn't bitter, at least not outwardly. I just couldn't afford to be. Bitterness, I had come to learn, is a luxury for those who still believe something might change. The only place I ever felt real, tangible warmth was at my grandparents' house. Thomas and Mary Morgan lived in a modest single-story brick home 10 minutes away from ours, but it felt like another universe. One with cookies cooling on racks, photo albums laid out on the coffee table, and laughter that didn't sound like it was being staged for an audience. Every Sunday afternoon, I went there under the pretense of helping them with groceries or yard work, but they knew. They always knew. That I needed them. That I needed to feel like someone saw me, and they never disappointed. Grandma would sit me down with a cup of tea and ask questions no one else had bothered to ask in years. What are you most excited about right now? What have you been learning lately? Is there anything you're afraid of? Grandpa, a retired school principal with a quiet but unwavering sense of justice, would pull out his old briefcase and walk me through mock interviews, teach me how to read legal documents, or explain stock portfolios like they were bedtime stories. You'll run your own company someday, Leave, he told me once, tapping my resume with a highlighter. And when you do, I want you to remember this. What they didn't give you will teach you how to give to yourself. It was at their kitchen table that I completed my financial aid applications, mapped out my college budget, and crafted a plan that no one else even knew existed. I didn't tell my parents when I officially accepted my spot at the University of Washington. There was no big announcement, no dinner celebration. I just mailed the paperwork, called my grandparents, and smiled through the phone as Grandma Mary cried softly, whispering, "You did it, baby. You did it." In the months leading up to graduation, my relationship with my family thinned to mere logistical necessity. My mother was consumed with planning Ava's pre-college summer abroad. My father was engrossed in a patent project at his firm. They barely noticed when I started coming home late, sometimes sleeping at friends' houses or on a couch in the back of the cafe after closing. If they noticed, they never said a word. Then came senior awards night. I had been nominated for the Perseverance Award, an honor given to a student who had overcome significant hardship with consistent academic performance. I didn't expect to win, but I did. And as I walked to the podium to accept the plaque, I looked out into the crowd and realized that my parents hadn't shown up. There were no familiar faces clapping in the front row, no camera flashes in my direction, just an empty space where they should have been. I kept the plaque in my backpack for 2 weeks before finally hanging it above my bed. It wasn't just an award, it was evidence that I had kept going, that even when no one noticed, I had chosen not to disappear. Graduation came quickly after that. As I stood in my cap and gown, Ava was already on her way to Spain for her study program. My parents didn't attend the ceremony. "Your mother isn't feeling well," my dad texted that morning. I didn't even reply. I walked across the stage, shook hands with the principal, and looked out into the crowd to find only 2 familiar faces. My grandparents, front row, beaming like I had just won the Nobel Prize. Later that evening, we sat in their backyard eating barbecue under twinkling string lights. Grandpa handed me a small envelope. Inside was a check. The memo read, "For your first semester, go change the world." I stared at it, eyes burning. "I can't accept this," I whispered. "You can," Grandma said, touching my arm gently, "because you've already earned it 10 times over." That night, lying in their guest room, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning above me and made a promise. I wouldn't just survive college. I would use it to become someone they'd never again overlook. Not because I needed their validation, but because I wanted to prove that the shadows they pushed me into were never my destiny. And yet, even with that determination, there was still a part of me, buried deep, that wished for a moment of reckoning. a day when they would realize what they'd done, that their neglect wasn't silent, that it had echoed in every room I sat alone, in every award I received with no applause, in every meal I cooked for myself while Ava was served catered dinners. I didn't know then that such a moment would come. Not quietly, not subtly, but in the most dramatic way possible, at a party meant to celebrate my greatest achievement, hijacked in the name of my sister once again. But that, of course, is a story for later. Right now, it's enough to remember this, that the invisible child didn't stay invisible. She learned how to walk through walls, and eventually she would learn how to speak so clearly. Even those who tried to silence her would have no choice but to listen. And when that moment came, it would not be a whisper, it would be a roar. Seattle didn't greet me with open arms. It greeted me with rain. Constant, rhythmic, gray rain that turned sidewalks into slick mirrors and drowned out thoughts with its steady hiss. But somehow, it was exactly what I needed. There was something therapeutic about the way the city never tried to shine too hard, never pretended to be anything it wasn't. It was real, honest. So unlike what I had left behind in Boulder. At the University of Washington, I became invisible again, but this time it felt like a gift. No one knew my history. No one saw me as the older sister of Ava. I was just Olivia Morgan, a business major who showed up early, sat in the front row, and took notes like her life depended on it. Because in many ways, it did. I lived in a small studio apartment in Capitol Hill with peeling paint on the windows and a heater that whined louder than it warmed. I didn't complain. I couldn't afford to. I was juggling 2 part-time jobs, mornings at a bakery cafe, evenings shelving books at a used bookstore, and somehow still found time to study into the early hours. My body was tired, but my mind felt more awake than ever. For the first time, I was building something that no one could take from me. There was no financial safety net, no monthly allowance. Every tuition payment, every textbook, every grocery bill was a line item in a budget that I kept taped to my fridge. I tracked every cent. When other students partied on weekends, I stayed home and devoured investment case studies and business podcasts. It wasn't discipline. It was necessity. I couldn't afford failure, not after what I had given up to be here. And yet, something inside me started to bloom. It was in Professor Hirsch's behavioral economics class that I first felt it, recognition. He was a man of few words, graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He noticed me early on. Maybe it was how I analyzed case studies or the way I connected psychological theory to consumer behavior. After one class, he stopped me as I packed my things. "You think differently," he said. "You see under the surface?" It was the first time in years that someone acknowledged my mind, not my shortcomings. He encouraged me to apply for a mentorship program run by the business school's alumni network. I hesitated. Imposter syndrome was still a familiar demon, but I did it. I was accepted, and it changed everything. Through that program, I was introduced to Titanbridge Capital, a boutique investment firm in downtown Seattle. I interned there the summer before my final year. My first day, I walked into the glass-paneled office in a blazer from a thrift store and shoes that pinched at the toes. I felt like a fraud, but I smiled. I listened. I took notes on everything. Everyone around me came from backgrounds I couldn't even imagine. Legacy students, children of fund managers, people with Ivy League confidence dripping from their posture. I had none of that. What I had was hunger and a bone-deep understanding that when no one hands you power, you have to create it for yourself. One night, while reviewing market analytics reports, I noticed something off in a portfolio linked to one of the firm's biggest tech clients. The numbers looked too clean, too perfectly rising despite a declining sector trend. Most interns would have passed it off. But I stayed up that night digging through quarterly appendices, cross-referencing historical benchmarks, and finally found it. A pattern of internal revenue reshuffling that pointed to artificial growth. I typed a 19-page memo and submitted it to my supervisor the next morning. By noon, I was in a meeting with the senior analysts. They didn't say much, but the next week that portfolio was quietly restructured. My name wasn't publicly mentioned, but a few days later, the CEO's assistant called and asked if I'd like to extend my internship through the fall. I said yes. Then I went into the break room and cried. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because for once, my mind had made a difference. After graduation, I was offered a full-time position. No celebration at home, no congratulations from Boulder, but my grandparents called, voices full of pride, and that was enough. Thomas told me, "This is just the beginning, kiddo. You're finally building your own table." I didn't just work at Titan Bridge, I lived it. I started staying late, studying risk models, and learning how market behaviors weren't just numbers, but stories, reflections of human emotion, fear, ambition. I started developing a framework on my own time, something I called Vista. It wasn't a flashy tool, it was an algorithm that took into account not just financial data, but public sentiment, social signals, and behavioral volatility. At first, I built it just for myself, to understand how people moved money the way they moved emotion. But after 3 accurate predictions on stock shifts tied to global news, I pitched it to the analytics team. They laughed, politely, dismissively. So I didn't ask again. Instead, I kept refining it. I tracked correlations. I ran silent simulations. I watched as Vista correctly flagged anomalies that traditional models missed. One day, during a quarterly performance review, I casually mentioned the system. A senior manager asked me to show him, then another. Within a month, Vista was being tested across 3 internal teams. And then the whispers began. Who's Olivia Morgan? Did she really build that alone? Why isn't she in management yet? I didn't care about gossip. I cared about leverage. Quietly, without flash or favoritism, I became the person they relied on when the stakes were high. And with each passing quarter, I started to feel something foreign to me until then. Stability. Not comfort, not luxury, but a steady, earned confidence that I could shape my own life. Still, there were moments I wished my parents could see me now. Not for their approval, but to prove that their silence hadn't broken me. That the girl they boxed into the corner had learned to thrive without their applause. But wishes were illusions. I had learned that the hard way. One chilly February morning, I was called into a glass conference room on the top floor. I thought it was about an account update. Instead, the CEO and 2 board members sat across from me. "We're restructuring," he said. "We want someone to lead strategy going forward, someone who sees the market differently. We'd like to offer you the role of Vice President of Strategic Development." I blinked. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I nodded. Yes, absolutely. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but that night, as I walked home past the shimmering lights on Pine Street, I paused at a small bakery window and stared at the pastries I used to serve. I remembered those early mornings, that stiff uniform, the aching feet, and I whispered to myself, "You made it." Later that week, I picked up the phone and called my mother. I don't know why I expected anything different. "Vice President?" she said flatly. "That's nice. Anyway, Ava's preparing for her nonprofit launch. Did you see the flyer?" It wasn't a surprise. It still hurt. But it also clarified something. I wasn't calling for her. I was calling to close the loop. I hung up, opened my laptop, and started planning a small celebration. Nothing grand. Just friends, mentors, my grandparents, a few trusted colleagues. A night to honor how far I had come. But when I told my mother about the plan, she offered almost too eagerly, "You should let us host it. It'll be more intimate. We'll make it a real family gathering. Just send over the funds. I'll handle everything." And for reasons I still can't fully explain, I agreed. I wired the money. I dared to believe. I hoped maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. It wasn't. But what happened at that party, the moment I finally took the mic, would change everything. Forever. When I transferred the money to my mother's account, I did it with a knot in my stomach that I tried to mistake for excitement. $4,000, saved through late nights, skipped coffees, and a promotion that finally made me feel like my work had a place in the world. The event was meant to celebrate my promotion to Vice President of Strategic Development at Titanbridge Capital. I wanted it to be something small but significant, an evening of warmth, surrounded by the few people who had truly seen me. But when my mother offered to host the party back in Boulder, at the house where I had once been invisible, I hesitated. There was history in every floorboard of that house, echoes of silences that had never been acknowledged, and memories of being dismissed in rooms that still carried Ava's framed awards. Still, I said yes. Somewhere inside me, I was still that girl who wanted to believe people could change. "It'll be intimate," my mother said. "Just family. You've come so far. We want to do this for you." Her tone was too smooth, like a script rehearsed to perfection, but I ignored it. Maybe this would be different. Maybe they would finally see me. I didn't tell anyone else I had doubts. I focused instead on work, on logistics, on finding a perfect thank you gift for my grandparents, who were flying in just for the night. I kept imagining the moment I'd walk in and see them smiling, the room buzzing with people genuinely proud of what I'd accomplished. That was the image I held onto. The day of the party arrived, and as the Uber pulled into my childhood street, my chest tightened. The house looked different, dressed to impress. There were white orchids lining the walkway, golden ribbons wrapped around the stair rails, and a catered bar under a canopy of lights. It looked like a wedding, not a promotion celebration. Still, I tried to stay calm. Maybe my mother had simply gone overboard. I stepped through the door and looked for familiar faces. The living room was filled with guests, some extended family, some strangers. My grandparents were near the bar, chatting with a few of my old teachers. They smiled when they saw me, and I felt the first flicker of comfort. But then I saw her. Ava was descending the stairs like a queen entering court, in a red satin dress that shimmered under the chandeliers. She held the hand of a man I didn't recognize, tall, polished, and clearly uncomfortable. All eyes turned toward her, glasses clinked, phones flashed. Before I could even process what was happening, my mother stood up and raised her glass. "Family," she said, beaming. "We are here tonight not just to reconnect, but to celebrate something truly special. Ava and her boyfriend Christopher are officially engaged." Cheers erupted around the room. I stood frozen. My ears rang with disbelief, my skin flushed hot. I felt like I was watching a scene from someone else's life, someone else's party. I scanned the room, hoping this was a misunderstanding, a cruel joke. But then I saw it. On the dessert table, the custom cake read, "Congratulations, Ava and Christopher." I turned to my mother, who met my gaze for half a second before looking away, as if I were nothing more than a guest at a party I had paid for. A party that was supposed to honor my career, my years of grit and sacrifice. I took a step forward, but before I could speak, my father reached for my arm. He leaned in, his grip tight, his voice lower than a whisper. "Don't ruin this," he said, the words like blades. "You make a scene now, and you lose everything. No contact, no inheritance, nothing." It was a threat, not a plea, a demand cloaked in menace. My stomach turned. I pulled my arm away quietly, slowly, and for a moment I almost walked out. Let them have their theater. Let them toast to a fiction. But something inside me refused to leave. The same voice that had whispered through every dark night in Seattle, that had kept me moving through exhaustion and rejection, rose now like fire. I walked to the center of the room, lifted a glass of untouched champagne, and tapped the side with the base of my fork. "Excuse me," I said, my voice calm but firm. The room quieted slowly. People turned towards me, expecting a toast, maybe even expecting congratulations for Ava and Christopher, but I wasn't here to play the part they had written for me. "This gathering today was planned for a different reason," I began. "I was promoted recently, Vice President of Strategic Development at Titanbridge Capital, a position I've worked toward for years." There was a pause, a shift. Guests looked at each other, some confused, some curious. "I transferred the money for this event," I continued. "I asked my mother to help host it as a celebration of that milestone. Not once was I told it would be used for an engagement announcement. Whispers erupted. My grandparents stood frozen, their eyes wide. I'm not here to diminish anyone else's joy, I said, turning toward Ava and Christopher, but I won't let my story be erased again, not after spending years being told I wasn't enough, not after building something for myself from scratch, without support, without applause, without favoritism. Christopher looked at Ava, his smile fading. You told me this was a family dinner, he said quietly. I just wanted the timing to feel right, Ava murmured, her voice cracking. By using your sister's money to stage your big reveal? He asked. She didn't answer. He set down his glass and stepped away. The silence that followed was heavy. Then my father stood, face red with rage. You should know your place, Olivia. This is still— No, I said, cutting him off. This house may still belong to you, but it hasn't been my home in a long time. A home sees its people, it hears them. This has never been that. My mother looked like she had aged 10 years in the span of 5 minutes. Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. Maybe she knew there was nothing she could say that wouldn't expose the truth further. I turned to my grandparents. They hadn't moved. But Grandma Mary's eyes were glassy, and Grandpa Thomas's jaw was clenched. I walked toward them, placed my glass on the table, and said, Thank you for always seeing me, for being the only reason I never gave up on myself. Then I turned and walked out the door I had once left in silence. This time I walked tall, and I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard voices rising, chairs scraping, and the clinking of a champagne glass falling to the floor. Ava's voice broke through, trembling and furious. You've always been jealous of me. You can't stand it when I get attention. I paused for a moment at the threshold but didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Her words were familiar, like an old coat I'd long since outgrown. I stepped into the night, the cool air wrapping around me like relief. I inhaled deeply. For the first time in my life, I had spoken the truth, not just to them, but to myself. This wasn't about a party. It never had been. It was about finally refusing to shrink. And what came next, what my grandparents did in that same room minutes later, was the beginning of a new chapter I never expected. One where everything they'd tried to deny me would finally be restored. But that's a story for next time. For a moment after I stepped outside, I stood frozen beneath the porch lights, their warm glow unable to melt the chill in my chest. The evening air was crisp, still, except for the distant murmurs of confused guests behind me and the fading click of Christopher's shoes as he walked away down the driveway alone. Somewhere inside the house my sister was crying, not out of heartbreak but humiliation. And still, I didn't feel victorious, only hollow. I was about to leave when the door creaked open behind me. I turned, half expecting a reprimand or a desperate plea to come back and smooth things over. But instead it was Grandpa Thomas. His walk was slow but steady, and when he stood next to me, he didn't speak right away. He just looked ahead, hands clasped behind his back. Inside, the noise was building again, confusion, excuses, the scrambling of a family trying to regain control of a narrative that had finally unraveled. He took a breath and said, They can't hurt you anymore. Not after tonight. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence that followed was the kind you share with someone who understands you without asking questions. A moment later, Grandma Mary joined us. She reached for my hand, her grip gentle, firm. You ready? She asked. For what? To finish this, she said. We walked back into the house together. The room fell silent when we entered, like someone had pressed pause on chaos. My parents stood near the center, stiff and flushed, as if they'd just been caught in the middle of something they couldn't explain. My mother opened her mouth, but my grandfather spoke first. Enough, he said. His voice wasn't raised, but it didn't need to be. Every word cut through the room like a bell ringing at the end of a long trial. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of Olivia's success. Instead, it became a performance, a deception. Dad, you don't understand, my mother began, but he held up a hand. I understand perfectly, and it's time everyone else does too. Then he turned to the crowd. Our extended family, family friends, colleagues who had once believed the Morgans were a model of success and unity. "We updated our will 3 months ago," he announced. "Every asset, every share, every property we own, everything is going to Olivia." The gasp was collective, sharp enough to pierce the silence. My parents froze. My mother's hand clutched the edge of the table like she might fall. "What?" she whispered, her face draining of color. "You can't do that. She's not your only granddaughter." "No," Grandma Mary said, stepping forward, "but she's the one who stood with integrity when the rest of you turned your backs." My father's voice cracked as he tried to regain control. "We supported Ava's future because she showed promise, because she had the potential." "And what about character?" Grandma said, her eyes blazing. "What about kindness, resilience, self-respect? You ignored Olivia for years, not because she lacked value, but because she didn't demand your attention, because she didn't play your games." Ava's cries echoed down the stairs. She didn't come back down. Not after Christopher left. Not after the truth had settled like dust on all the surfaces that used to gleam. My mother shook her head slowly, lips trembling. "You're punishing us." "No," Grandpa said. "We're choosing, just like you did." The room was still. No one moved. No one interrupted. One by one, the people who had once praised Ava's every move began to look away, embarrassed, unsure of where to stand. And in the center of it all, I stood motionless, not because I was shocked, but because, for once, I didn't need to say anything. The truth had spoken for me. When it was over, the guests filtered out quickly, offering tight smiles and murmured goodbyes. I didn't follow them. I stayed to help my grandparents gather their things, thanking them not with words, but in the quiet ways they'd always appreciated, clearing plates, folding napkins, carrying boxes to the car. As we drove back to their house, no one spoke for a while. The headlights cut through the dark, lighting a path that felt entirely new. "I never asked for this," I said finally, my voice soft. "We know," Grandpa replied, "and that's exactly why you deserve it." Back at their home, I sat at the kitchen table while Grandma made tea and Grandpa lit the fireplace. The tension of the night slowly drained from my shoulders. I was exhausted, but beneath it all, I felt something strange and powerful. Closure. Not because I'd been named the heir, not because I'd finally been defended, but because, for once, someone had looked at the whole picture and chosen me, not in spite of my quietness, but because of it. I spent the next few days resting in their guest room, reading, writing, and sleeping more than I had in months. When I returned to Seattle, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Certainty. The kind that comes not from security, but from self-knowing. I didn't owe anyone a performance anymore. I didn't need to compete for visibility. My story had unfolded, not in a blaze of revenge, but in the steady light of truth. At work, things were shifting too. Vista, the predictive model I had developed in silence, was now being integrated into the company's core investment strategy. I led new initiatives, mentored young analysts, and was asked to speak at conferences. My team started calling me the compass, because no matter how volatile the market got, I seemed to know where we were heading. I no longer felt like I was proving anything. I was simply building. One Friday afternoon, as I wrapped up a boardroom presentation on global behavioral trends, the CEO of Titanbridge, a man named Wallace who rarely showed emotion, clapped slowly and said, "I've been in this industry 30 years. I've never seen a model do what yours has done. But more than that, I've never seen someone lead the way you do." He paused. "I want you to start considering the bigger picture, not just strategy, leadership." I nodded, trying to appear composed, but inside something flickered, something I hadn't let myself imagine. Leadership, ownership, legacy. That evening I walked through the city as the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting golden reflections off every glass pane. I passed the bakery where I used to work mornings, the bookstore where I shelved books to buy my first business textbook. I walked past each memory like I was watching an old version of myself waving goodbye. And when I arrived home, I sat on my balcony, called my grandparents, and told them everything. They didn't say much, But Grandpa laughed and Grandma whispered the same words she'd said when I first got into college. You did it. And I had. But it wasn't the success that mattered most. It was that I had chosen to stay true to myself in a world that had done everything to erase me. What happened at the party had been a breaking point, but it was also a beginning. The beginning of me claiming the space I had always deserved, not because someone finally made room for me, but because I had learned how to stand without asking permission. And that, I knew, was only the start. Because what came next would be even bigger. Not just a new title, not just a new role, but a new era, one that I would write entirely on my own terms. 3 years after that night, the night I stood in the center of a house that had tried for years to silence me and spoke the truth anyway, I walked into the main hall of Titan Bridge Capital to the sound of applause. Camera flashes lit the room, executives lined the sides in polished suits, and a sea of shareholders sat waiting for my voice. I stepped to the podium, took a breath, and spoke not to impress them, but to represent everything I had become. My name is Olivia Morgan, I said. And I wasn't born into this position. I built it. One step at a time, in quiet rooms, on late nights, with nothing to lean on but grit and clarity. When I stepped down from that stage, I was the youngest female CEO in Titan Bridge Capital's 60-year history, but the moment didn't feel loud. It felt still. Like the final line in a book you've carried with you for so long that turning the last page feels more like a whisper than a shout. I exited the stage, walked past congratulations, shook hands, smiled. But the first thing I did when I stepped into my new office, now twice the size of the one where Vista was first built, was pick up my phone and call the only people who had believed in me from the beginning. I did it, I whispered, the words trembling out of my chest. On the other end, Grandpa Thomas chuckled and Grandma Mary said softly and without hesitation, "We never doubted you." Those words landed more deeply than any headline, any bonus, any contract. They reminded me who I'd been before the title. A girl with no spotlight, no soft landings, just belief. Life became busier, but it also became more peaceful. The chaos I used to carry inside, the questions, the doubt, the longing to be seen, had all quieted. I still worked late, still reviewed strategy briefs with the same intensity I had back in college. But I no longer worked to prove. I worked to create, to lead, to build what I had once needed myself. Every Sunday, I still visited my grandparents in their red brick home. We'd sit at the same table, flip through old photo albums, and talk about everything except business. Grandma made her lemon bars. Grandpa pretended not to remember old stories, so I would retell them just to hear me speak. Once, over dinner, I asked them if they ever regretted leaving their entire estate to me. Grandma wiped her hands on her apron and said, "We didn't leave it because of what it was worth. We left it because of who you became without it." Grandpa added, "We chose character over convenience. You didn't take the easy road. You took the honest one. And that's what lasts." It stayed with me, those words, especially when the world started to notice what we had built. Vista evolved into a full-scale behavioral market division. Titan Bridge expanded its reach globally, with our team guiding economic predictions across continents. I was invited to speak at international forums. My story, once hidden behind closed doors, became a case study in resilience and innovation. And yet, not everything changed. Back in Boulder, Ava was now 27. The engagement to Christopher had ended within weeks of the party. She dropped out of her fashion and marketing course, citing unrealistic expectations. Her influencer brand never took off. "People don't understand my vibe," she once said in an interview that went viral for all the wrong reasons. Eventually, she moved back in with our parents, into the very room she once took from me. I hadn't spoken to any of them since that night. Occasionally, my grandparents would mention that someone asked about me through a family friend, but I never responded. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel sadness anymore. Just distance. The kind that no bridge could span without truth on both sides. Then one spring afternoon, as I returned from a strategy session that spanned 3 continents and 2 time zones, I stepped into Titan Bridge's downtown lobby and stopped. There she was, Avenue standing in a designer coat with her signature heels, looking smaller than I remembered. She held a clutch tightly in her hand, her eyes scanning the floor until they met mine. "I'm not here to apologize," she said quickly, as if rehearsed. I just want to understand. How do you do it? How do you succeed when no one lifts you up?" I didn't speak right away. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see the girl who had everything. I saw the woman who never learned to stand on her own. "Because I had no one to catch me," I finally said, "and that's when I learned how to climb." She blinked, her lips parted slightly as if to reply, but she didn't. She turned, heels clicking against the marble floor, and walked out of the building without another word. I didn't follow. I didn't wonder if she'd change. That wasn't mine to carry anymore. What I knew, in that moment more than ever, was this. I would never go back to being the sister who yielded, who dimmed, who broke herself in pieces to keep the peace. That chapter had ended. I had closed the book. Later that evening, I met with my executive team in a glass conference room that overlooked the city. We mapped out a plan for a new initiative, one that would provide mentorship and investment for underrepresented young women in finance. As I stood there guiding the discussion, it hit me that I wasn't just leading a company anymore. I was building something I had needed at 17, a space where no one would be forgotten, where no one had to fight just to be seen. After the meeting, I walked to my office, turned on the record player I'd set up months earlier, and played an old Nina Simone track. The music filled the space softly. My fingers traced the edge of my desk, the wood cool and smooth. I looked around and smiled, not at the success, not at the view, not even at the plaque with my name, but because I finally understood the full arc of my journey. My story wasn't just about a family's favoritism. It wasn't even about proving anyone wrong. It was about choosing myself, over and over again, in every room, at every table, in every moment where silence seemed easier. I had spoken, I had stayed, I had stood my ground, and now I was leading, not out of spite, but out of service. Not to show them what they lost, but to give others what I had to build alone. As the sun set outside, casting amber reflections on the glass, I picked up my phone one last time. I scrolled to the photo of me and my grandparents on graduation day, arms wrapped around each other, faces lit with something purer than pride. Love. And I whispered just to myself, "Thank you for seeing me before I ever saw myself." This was never about revenge. It was always about truth. And now, finally, I was free. Looking back on Olivia Morgan's story is like walking through a gallery of quiet battles and unspoken victories. Hers was never a life defined by fireworks or fanfare. It was sculpted slowly, layer by layer, with the kind of determination that grows in silence and is nurtured not by praise but by perseverance. What began in the shadows of favoritism and emotional neglect evolved into a journey of self-discovery, resilience, and the reclamation of voice. From the very beginning, Olivia was cast not as the protagonist of her family's story, but as the backdrop to her sister Ava's spotlight. Despite being the firstborn, she was treated like an afterthought, a placeholder while her parents placed all their hopes, ambitions, and resources on the younger sibling. Olivia wasn't just overlooked. She was made to feel replaceable, her milestones diminished, her efforts dismissed. Her childhood bedroom was taken, her college fund reallocated, and her achievements consistently outshined by Ava's orchestrated brilliance. And yet, Olivia never allowed bitterness to consume her. While many would have unraveled under that constant tide of invalidation, she chose a different path. Not one of confrontation or open rebellion, but of quiet defiance. She built herself from the ground up, one scholarship application, one cafe shift, one late-night study session at a time. She made no demands, asked for no recognition, and instead invested everything into her future. In Seattle, she found space to breathe. A small studio apartment, 2 jobs, and an endless hunger for independence became the foundation of her rebirth. It was there, far from the constraints of her family's expectations, that she began to unlock her true potential. She discovered mentors who saw beyond her quiet demeanor, opportunities that she earned with sweat and substance, and a vision for investment strategy rooted not only in data, but in human psychology and empathy. Vista, her behavioral analytics model, wasn't just a technical achievement. It was a metaphor for how she had learned to read the world, beneath the surface, beyond the noise. Her rise in Titanbridge Capital was hard-earned and deeply personal. She didn't rise because of a last name or legacy. She rose because she had done the work in obscurity and had stayed ready. So when the door cracked open, she walked through it, not with entitlement, but with purpose. The turning point of Olivia's story wasn't the promotion. It wasn't even the public exposure of her family's betrayal at the celebration, hijacked by her sister's engagement. It was the moment she stood in the room where she had once been silenced and finally spoke her truth. She didn't scream, didn't seek revenge. She simply revealed. And that act of courage, that refusal to be erased one more time, opened a new chapter. One not just of recognition, but of restoration. Her grandparents' unwavering belief was the quiet through line in her story. They didn't just fund her education or defend her when no one else would. They believed in her when she didn't yet believe in herself. And their final gesture, naming her the sole heir to their legacy, wasn't about money. It was about acknowledgement, about affirming the worth that had always been there, hidden behind years of comparison and neglect. But perhaps the most profound transformation in Olivia's life wasn't professional or financial. It was emotional. It was the shift from needing her family's validation to standing fully in her own value. When Ava showed up years later, still bewildered by her sister's strength, Olivia didn't meet her with cruelty. She met her with clarity. The ability to say, "I made it without being lifted," wasn't just a statement of pride. It was a truth born from years of climbing alone. So, what is the lesson we're meant to carry from Olivia's story? It's that resilience isn't loud. It's quiet. It doesn't always come from the grand gestures or the dramatic moments. Sometimes it comes from the choice to show up, even when no one notices. To keep going, even when the path is unpaved and unkind. It's the power of choosing yourself, again and again, until the world has no choice but to see you for who you truly are. In today's world, where so many of us are still chasing approval, whether from family, society, or ourselves, Olivia's journey reminds us that true success doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing integrity over recognition, choosing growth over comfort, choosing to speak up when silence is expected. And when we do that, when we finally stop waiting for the world to crown us and instead build our own crown from the ashes of all the times we were told we weren't enough, that's when the real transformation happens. Now I want to hear from you. Here's a question to reflect on based on Olivia's journey. If you were in Olivia's shoes during that engagement party, sidelined, silenced, and betrayed, what would you have done? Would you A, stay quiet and walk away peacefully, preserving your dignity but saying nothing? B, stand up and speak your truth, even if it meant disrupting the entire room? Type your answer in the comments, A or B, and don't just drop a letter, tell us why. What would you feel? What do you think you'd regret more, staying silent or making noise? Your voice matters, and your perspective could help someone else find theirs. Let's open up the conversation. What part of Olivia's story resonated with you the most? Was it her quiet resilience? Her decision to walk away from toxic ties? Her ability to succeed without support? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story touched you personally. And if this story moved you even a little, if it made you think, reflect, or feel, please subscribe to our channel. Your support fuels us to continue creating stories that don't just entertain, but remind us of what it means to fight for our place, to heal, and to thrive. We've got more powerful stories ahead, stories that reflect the truth behind smiles, the strength behind silence, and the beauty of becoming who you were always meant to be. Thank you for being part of this one. Let's keep building together.